She did not walk into Calderwood, Wyoming, the way a woman walks into a town she plans to stay in. She walked in the way a woman walks when she has run out of places to go, and the road behind her has closed itself off like a wound finally done bleeding. She came from the south, from the direction of the Dry Creek Flats that stretched pale and merciless for 40 miles, and she had 2 children on foot beside her, and one on her hip, and nothing else in this world that belonged to her except the dress on her back, which had once been blue and was now the color of the road itself. Her name was Nora Vane. She was 28 years old. She did not look it. The town of Calderwood sat at the base of the Clearwater Range in the summer of 1881, pressed between the mountains and the river, like something the landscape had forgotten to finish deciding about. It had a general store, a livery, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse on weekdays, a saloon that did not double as anything because it had no interest in improving itself, and approximately 300 people who all knew each other's business and were not remotely in the market for new business to know. Nora passed the saloon without looking at it. She had learned not to look at saloons. She passed the general store and the post office and the barber shop with its sun-faded pole turning slow in the August heat. She was looking for shade. Somewhere the children could sit without being watched, because public attention on her children was something she felt on her skin like a burn. That particular kind of small-town watching that dressed itself up as concern, but was really just hunger for a story. What she found instead of shade was a barn. It sat at the western edge of town, where the last buildings gave out to open land, a big, solid-built structure, weathered silver gray, with the door standing half open the way barn doors stand when their owner has gone out, meaning to come back shortly. She stopped in front of it. She looked at the door. She looked at her children. Jessie was 7, dark-eyed, serious in the way children become serious when they have watched adults struggle long enough to conclude that seriousness is the correct response to the world. He held Maggie's hand without being asked. He had been doing that for 8 months without being asked. Maggie was 5, fair-haired, with a stubborn set to her mouth that Nora considered both her greatest worry and her deepest source of private pride. Maggie had not cried once in 3 days of walking. Nora did not know what to do with that fact, except carry it alongside everything else. The baby, Cal, was on Nora's hip, his face pressed into her neck, asleep with the complete surrender of children who have decided to trust their mother to handle whatever was happening. He was not yet 2. Nora went into the barn. It smelled of hay and horses and dry timber and the particular warm darkness of a space that had been worked in for a long time by someone who knew what they were doing. 2 horses stood in their stalls, a roan and a big gray, both of whom turned to look at her with the mild, unhurried attention of animals that had seen enough of the world to be unimpressed by a woman walking in uninvited. She settled the children in the far corner, in the deep hay behind the last stall, where the light came in low and gold through the gap in the boards. She set Cal down. He curled on his side without waking. She sat Jessie and Maggie down on either side of him, and she said quietly, "Stay right here. Don't make noise. I'm going to find us some water." Jessie looked at her. "Are we supposed to be in here?" "Not exactly," Nora said, "but we're not hurting anything." He considered that with the solemn judgment of a child who has been made to think carefully about rules and when they apply. Then he nodded and put his back against the barn wall and pulled his sister close, and that was that. Nora had been gone 4 minutes when she heard the barn door. She heard it from the pump at the back of the property, heard the creak of it opening fully, heard boots on the floor, and she moved without thinking, back around the corner, back through the low door, back to her children, because that was the only direction she ever moved in anymore. Toward them. She came around the last stall and stopped. A man was crouched in front of her children. He was big, broad across the shoulders, in a worn canvas work shirt and boots that had seen hard use and kept going anyway. He had his hat in his hands, and he was at eye level with Jessie, which meant he had come down to the child's height deliberately, which was not what Nora had expected, and knocked her off the script she'd been running in her head as she ran back through the barn. Jessie was watching him with those dark, careful eyes. Maggie had pulled her knees to her chest. Cal was still asleep. The man heard Nora come in. He turned and looked at her. He did not stand up fast, did not startle, just turned and looked at her with gray eyes that were calm in the particular way of a man who has learned that alarm costs you more than it earns you. "Ma'am," he said. "Sir," she said. She kept her voice level. She stepped between him and her children. He stood then, slowly, unhurried, and took a step back to give her the space, which she noticed. It was a small thing. She noticed it anyway. "This your barn?" she asked. "It is," he said. She looked at him directly. "We weren't stealing anything. We needed to stop." "I can see that." A silence. Outside, the Wyoming heat pressed down on the afternoon without mercy. "I'll take them out," she said. "Just give me a minute to get the baby." "You don't have to." She stopped. "You been walking long?" he asked. Not suspicious, not performing concern, just asking, the way a man asks when he wants the actual answer. 3 days, she said. His jaw moved once. Something tightened behind his eyes and then settled. "From where?" "Harlow Creek, south of here." He was quiet. He looked at the 3 children, at the baby asleep in the hay, at Jesse's hand wrapped around Maggie's arm. Then he looked at Nora. Really looked, the way almost no one had looked at her in 8 months. Not at the situation, at her. "My name is Boone Callister," he said. "I run this property." "Nora," she said. She let it sit there incomplete. The way you set something down that you're not ready to hand over entirely. He didn't push on it. "You eaten today?" She looked at him for a moment. "That's a personal question, Mr. Callister." "It is," he agreed. "You can tell me to mind my own." She waited. 8 months of being told she was a problem. 8 months of doors that closed before she could get a foot in them. 8 months of learning that honesty was a luxury that got more expensive the lower you got. "We haven't," she said. He nodded once, like a man filing information. "All right, stay here. I'll be back." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." He was already moving. "Stay put." He came back in 10 minutes. He was carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle and a canteen, and he set them both down in the hay in front of the children without ceremony or expectation. Nora looked inside the cloth. Cornbread already cut, a wedge of hard cheese, dried beef, 4 small apples. "Mr. Callister," she started. "Boone," he said, "and you don't need to thank me. Just eat." She looked at him for a moment, this stranger who had looked at her 3 children and crouched down to their height without being asked, and she felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and complicated that she had no business feeling. She pressed it back down. "Jesse," she said quietly. Jesse was already moving, already taking the canteen, already bringing the water to Maggie first, because Cal was asleep, and Maggie was the one who would get thirsty without saying so. Nora watched her son do this, and felt the particular ache of watching a child learn your habits without you meaning to teach them. Boone Callister sat on a hay bale 6 feet away and did not speak while the children ate. He had his arms resting on his knees and his hat turning slow in his hands, and he watched without watching, the way people watch when they're trying not to make you feel observed. When the children were eating steadily, Nora turned to him. "Why?" she asked. Flat and direct. She had learned that softness was something you earned back slowly, not something you gave away on the front end. "Because 3 children were hungry," he said. "Didn't need a reason past that." She studied him. "Most people in a town like this have a reason to look away. Most people are wrong about a lot of things." He said it without edge, without performance. Just a fact he'd arrived at through experience and wasn't particularly interested in arguing about. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Nowhere yet. Somewhere that'll take us." "You got family?" "No." "Money?" "No." "Skills?" Her voice came back quicker on that one, harder. "Yes, I can cook, clean, mend, take in laundry, keep accounts, preserve food, manage a household, and teach children their letters. I am not helpless, Mr. Callister. I am broke and tired, and I need a place to start." He studied her. There was something in his face during that moment that she couldn't quite read. Not pity, not suspicion, something more careful than both. "Mrs. Aldred over on Pine runs the boarding house," he said slowly. "She lost her cook 3 weeks ago. She's been managing alone, and she's not young. She's also a fair woman, which is more than you can say for everyone in this town." He paused. "I could walk you over if you want." Nora stared at him. In 3 days on the road, in the weeks before that, when she'd been making her way east, she had asked 9 different people in 4 different towns for help. 9 people. She had been turned away 7 times, given charity that felt like being handed something rotten twice, and never once had anyone offered her an actual path forward, a real one. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, because she needed to understand it. She had learned the hard way that kindness with a hidden price was worse than no kindness at all. He was quiet for a beat. "My sister came to a town alone with 2 children after her husband died," he said. "She asked for work. They told her to keep moving." He paused. "She didn't make it through that year." Nora said nothing. "So," he said, standing up and pressing his hat back onto his head. "Mrs. Aldred, you want me to take you?" She looked at her children. Jessie was watching her, already waiting to follow whatever she decided, because that was who her son had become. "Yes," Nora said. "Yes, I do. If this story is reaching something in you, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop the name of your town in the comments. I want to see how far Nora's story travels." Calderwood had opinions about everything and everyone, and it formed them fast. By the time Boone Callister walked Nora Vane and her 3 children down the center of Main Street to Mrs. Aldred's boarding house on Pine Road, at least a dozen pairs of eyes had tracked the movement from windows and doorways with the quiet efficiency of a town that ran on information the way other things ran on water. The first opinion came from Harlan Price. Harlan Price was the mayor of Calderwood in the way that small-town mayors are mayors, which is to say he had been appointed to the position through a combination of owning the most property and having the loudest voice at meetings, and he had held it for 11 years by the simple method of making himself useful to the people who might otherwise remove him. He was not a cruel man. He was a convenient one, which was sometimes worse. He was sitting in the saloon at 3 in the afternoon when Gerald Moss, who owned the barber shop and considered himself the town's unofficial intelligence bureau, came in and sat down across from him. Boone Callister walked a woman and 3 children into the Aldred boarding house, Gerald said without preamble, because Gerald had no patience for preamble when he had information. Harlan looked up from his glass. "What woman?" "Don't know. Came in from the south this morning. No wagon, no horse. 3 children, no husband that anyone's seen." Harlan set down his glass. He thought about what that meant in terms of the machinery of this town, because everything in Calderwood eventually became a question of machinery, of who moved, what, and in which direction. "Boone took her to Aldred's himself?" he said. "Walked her in through the front door." Harlan made a sound in the back of his throat. "I'll talk to him," he said. Mrs. Vera Aldred was 63 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and had buried 1 husband and survived raising 4 sons, which she considered the harder of the 2 achievements. She was the kind of woman who had been tested so thoroughly by life that only the load-bearing parts remained, and those parts turned out to be considerable. She opened her door before Boone knocked because she had watched them coming up the walk, and she looked at Nora the way women who have been through things look at women who are currently in the middle of things. Straight and clear, no detours. "Come in," she said. "All of you." Nora stepped inside and felt, for the first time in 8 months, the particular sensation of a door closing behind her rather than in front of her. "I can work," Nora started. "Whatever you need." "Later," Mrs. Aldred said. "Right now, you need water, food, and a place to sit. Everything else waits." She turned to the children. "Which one of you is oldest?" "Me," Jessie said. "Ma'am, you want to help me in the kitchen?" He looked at Nora. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Boone stood in the doorway while the children were settled. Mrs. Aldred turned to him with the particular look she reserved for men she had watched since they were young enough to be influenced. "You staying?" "No, ma'am, I've got to get back." "Boone." Her voice dropped slightly, lost its efficiency. "You did right." "Just did what should have been done," he said. He looked at Nora once before he left. She was already moving, already lifting Cal to her shoulder, already turning to help Maggie find a chair, already managing, already doing the 100 small things that had become the entire architecture of her life. She didn't look up. He left. That evening, when the light finally dropped low over the Clearwater Range and the heat broke by the narrowest possible margin, Boone Callister sat on his porch steps and looked at the mountains and thought about a woman who had come into his barn like she was used to making do with less than she needed and not complaining about it. He thought about Jesse's hand around Maggie's arm. He thought about the way she'd said no when he asked if she had family, plain and final, the way people say things they've made their peace with. He thought about the fact that she hadn't given him a last name. He'd noticed. She'd said Nora the way you say a word when you're testing whether it's still yours. He'd let it go. It wasn't his business. He told himself that twice before he went inside. Across town, in the back room of the Aldred boarding house, 3 children were asleep on a wide bed that smelled of cedar and clean linen, and Nora sat on the edge of it and watched them breathe. Jesse, Maggie, Cal. She said their names in her head the way she said them every night. 3 heartbeats, 3 futures that were entirely her responsibility and entirely the reason she had not stopped walking. She pressed her palm flat against the cool plaster wall and breathed. One day, she thought, one day at a time. Outside, a warm wind moved through the cottonwoods along Pine Road, and the whole town of Calderwood settled into the dark without knowing yet what was coming. Neither did she. Nora was up before the sun. That was the one thing that the road and the past 8 months had not managed to take from her. The early hours, when the house was still, and the children were breathing, and the world hadn't started making demands yet. She'd learned to live inside those minutes, like they were a room only she had a key to. She found the kitchen without needing to be shown. She had mapped the boarding house last night in the way that women do when they're sleeping somewhere new, half awake, cataloging exits and corners, learning the layout before she needed it in a hurry. She had a fire going in the stove in 5 minutes. She was making biscuits when Mrs. Aldred appeared in the doorway. The old woman stopped, looked at the flour on Nora's hands, the biscuits lined up on the pan, the coffee coming to a boil. She made a sound low in her throat that was not quite a laugh. "I told you to rest," she said. "I rested," Nora said. 4 hours is enough. 4 hours is not enough. It's what I have. She slid the pan toward the oven. "Sit down, Mrs. Aldred. Coffee's almost ready." The old woman sat. She watched Nora move around the kitchen with the efficient, economical grace of someone who had been cooking for others for a long time and had run out of patience for wasted motion. "How long have you been alone?" Mrs. Aldred asked. Nora kept her eyes on the stove. 8 months. With 3 children. Yes. And you walked here. Most of it. She poured the coffee and set the cup in front of her. "I'm not looking for sympathy, Mrs. Aldred. I'm looking for a chance to work and a safe place for my children while I figure out what comes next. That's all." Mrs. Aldred wrapped both hands around the cup. "You know what I told my youngest son when he was trying to prove himself at 22? She said. "I told him that pride is a fine thing to keep until it starts costing you more than you can afford." Nora turned to look at her. "I'm not telling you to beg," the old woman said. "I'm telling you that letting somebody help you isn't weakness. It's sense." She took a sip of the coffee and nodded once, approvingly. "Biscuits ready soon?" "About 12 minutes. "Then sit down for 12 minutes and talk to me." Nora sat. It felt strange, the sitting, like something she'd forgotten how to do all the way. "I don't know what I'm doing next," she said. It came out before she could catch it. "I had a plan when I left. Get east, find work, get a room, build something small, simple enough on paper, but then Maggie got sick for nearly 2 weeks, and we lost time, and the money went faster than I expected, and then the last family that gave us a ride left us at the Harlow Creek turnoff, and She pressed her palms flat on the table. "Here is better than where I was. I know that. But I don't have a plan past here." Mrs. Aldred looked at her with the steady, unsentimental eyes of a woman who had outlived enough to know that most plans don't survive contact with the actual world anyway. "Here is enough for today," she said. "Plans can wait until tomorrow." Boone came by at 8:30. He knocked on the back door because the back door was the working door, and Boone Callister was a man who came in through the working door. Nora answered it. They looked at each other for a beat that lasted a half-second longer than it needed to. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. "You want coffee?" "Please." He came in and took off his hat and nodded to Mrs. Aldred, who looked at him the way old women look at men they've watched grow up, with the full accounting of everything they've ever done right there in the gaze. He sat across from her. Nora set a cup in front of him. "Sleep well?" he asked her. "Well enough," she said. "You?" "Didn't much." He said it plainly. "I had a visit from Harlan Price last night that I've been chewing on." Nora set down her cup. "About me?" "About you." He wrapped his hands around the coffee. "He thinks it'd be better for the town if you moved on." His word was disruption. The kitchen went quiet. Even the children, who had come down to breakfast and arranged themselves around the table with the instinctive animal awareness of children who have learned to read adult silence, went still. "And what did you tell him?" Nora asked. Boone looked up at her. "I told him I wasn't in the business of moving women with children out of the county." Mrs. Aldred made a sound that was definitely a short, sharp laugh. Nora felt something shift in her chest. She pressed it back down harder this time. "You shouldn't make trouble over me," she said. "You don't know me." "I know enough." He said it simply, without theater. "I know you walked 40 miles with 3 children and a baby on your hip, and you still looked the world in the eye when you came into this town. That's enough to know. If you're still with Nora right now, if her story is sitting somewhere inside your chest, this is the moment to subscribe. Hit the bell. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from." I read every single one. The woman who decided Nora Vane was a problem was named Delia Forsyth. Delia Forsyth was 57 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and had appointed herself the moral weather vane of Calderwood sometime in the mid-1870s and never stepped down from the position. She was not a bad woman in any straightforward sense. She was a woman who had constructed an idea of how things should be and had spent decades defending that idea with the energy and conviction of someone who had confused their own preferences with universal law. She called it a gathering. She did not call it what it was, which was a campaign. By 10 in the morning, 5 women were assembled in Delia's parlor with cups of tea they were not particularly interested in, and a subject they very much were. "She's at Vera Aldred's," Delia said, which surprises no one who knows Vera's history of taking in strays. "She works hard," said Frances Holt, who had the most naturally even temperament in the room, and whom the other women privately considered naively optimistic as a result. "I saw her hanging laundry this morning at 6 o'clock. "That's not the point," Delia said. "The point is what she is. No husband, no family, no last name, 3 children, each one a testament to choices she made. She let that sit. And now Boone Callister has decided to make her his personal cause." There was a murmur. "What exactly are you suggesting?" asked Winifred Cross, who was practical by nature and preferred directness. "I'm suggesting," Delia said, "that we make it clear to this woman what kind of town Calderwood is, and that she would find herself considerably more comfortable elsewhere." "And if she doesn't want to go elsewhere?" Winifred said. Delia smiled. It was a thin, precise smile that had been refined over decades of getting what she wanted through channels that were technically respectable. "Then we make Calderwood very difficult to stay in." They went to Mrs. Aldred first, Delia and Winifred together mid-afternoon, while Nora was in the back garden with the children and the house was quiet. Mrs. Aldred answered the door and looked at them both on her porch with an expression of absolute serenity. "Delia," she said. Winifred. "We came as friends," Delia began. "Then come in as friends," Mrs. Aldred said, opening the door wider. They came in. They sat in the parlor. They accepted the water she brought and waited while she arranged herself in her chair with the unhurried calm of a woman who was entirely comfortable and had no intention of changing that. "We're concerned," Delia started. "This woman you've taken in, we know nothing about her. She could be anyone." She made the best biscuits I've had in 6 years," Mrs. Aldred said. She scrubbed my kitchen floor this morning before I was awake. She fixed the latch on the garden gate that's been broken since April. She paused. Dangerous is a creative interpretation. Eleanor. The children are polite, Mrs. Aldred continued, as if Delia hadn't spoken. The oldest one, Jesse, he's been helping me carry water every morning without being asked. He's 7 years old, and he works harder than most men I've employed. She looked at Delia steadily. Whatever you came to say it plainly, or go home. Winifred looked at her hands. Delia recalibrated. We're going to speak to Reverend Hatch, she said carefully, about whether the church school should be enrolling children whose parentage is uncertain. Mrs. Aldred did not flinch. On what grounds? Unknown circumstances. Unstable household. They are at my house. Is my household unstable? A beat of silence. And if you speak to Reverend Hatch, Mrs. Aldred continued, her voice losing its warmth and gaining an edge that both women recognized and respected despite themselves, I will speak to every family in this town whose children are in that school, and I will make it very clear that Delia Forsyth used the church to punish 3 children for their mother's misfortune. Is that what you want? Silence. We were expressing concern, Winifred said quietly. I know what you were expressing. Mrs. Aldred stood, which was the signal that the visit was over. I'll tell Nora you stopped by. Nora heard about it from Jesse. He had been on the stairs, not eavesdropping, he would say later, just sitting, and he had heard enough. He came to find her in the garden, with his jaw set and his hands at his sides, and he said, Mama, there were ladies here. Nora kept hanging the shirt in her hands. I know. They want to stop us from going to school. She didn't answer right away. She reached up and pinned the corner of the shirt and smoothed it flat. Jesse, she said, are you scared? He thought about it carefully because Jesse took honesty seriously. A little, he said. Me too. She turned to look at him, but Mrs. Aldred sent them away and we're still here. What if they come back? Then we deal with it then. She held his gaze. We don't spend today being afraid of tomorrow. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. She pulled him close, just for a moment, because Jesse was 7 and didn't always want to be held anymore, and he let her, which told her exactly how scared he actually was. We've handled worse, she said into his hair. He nodded against her shoulder. Go help Maggie keep Cal out of the flower beds, she said. He went. Nora turned back to the laundry. Her hands were steady. Everything else inside her was not. Boone came back at sundown. He came around the side of the house and found Nora on the back step with Cal asleep across her lap, watching the sky go orange and deep above the Clearwater Range. He sat down beside her without asking. They were quiet for a while. Cal breathed with the deep, committed breathing of a sleeping baby, like sleep was serious work and he was dedicated to doing it properly. Delia went to Vera, Boone said. I heard. Vera handled it. I heard that too. She looked at him sideways. You have a network. Small town. She threatened the church school, Nora said, not asking, saying it flat so she could hear what it sounded like outside her own head. She's bluffing, Boone said. Hatch doesn't have the backbone to move against Vera Aldred, and he knows it. I don't care about church politics, Nora said quietly. I care that my children are being used as a tool to get at me. He went still beside her. I'm sorry, he said. Just that. Not it'll be fine or don't worry or any of the comfortable, useless things people reach for when they can't fix something. Just, I'm sorry. She looked at him. In the fading light, he looked tired, not beaten. There was nothing defeated about this man. But tired in the way people get when they have been carrying something heavy for long enough that they can't quite remember what it felt like to set it down. Why does it matter to you? She asked. Specifically, there must be other people in this town who needed help. He was quiet for a moment. My sister's name was May, he said. She came to a town in Colorado with 2 children after her husband passed. She had nothing, and she asked people for work. He paused. They told her to move on, said she'd figure something out. She didn't, Nora said. She didn't. He turned to look at the mountains. I was 23. I couldn't get there in time. The quiet stretched between them, full rather than empty. I named Cal for my grandfather, Nora said after a moment. The only man in my family who was worth naming anything after. Good reason, he said. Another silence, easier this time. The sky went purple dark over the peaks. You should get the children enrolled with Reverend Hatch tomorrow morning, Boone said, getting back to practical, because that was where he retreated when emotion got too close to the surface. Before Delia can build momentum, first thing, I'll walk you over. People will talk. They're already talking. He stood and brushed the dust from his pants. Might as well give them something real to say. He picked up his hat. Nora. She looked up. You're tougher than this town. Remember that. He left before she could answer. She sat there in the cooling evening with her baby on her lap and the stars beginning to open above the mountains, and she thought about a woman named May who had asked a town for help and been told to keep moving. She thought about a 23-year-old man who couldn't get there in time. She looked down at Cal's sleeping face. She looked at Jessie through the window, bent over a piece of paper at Mrs. Aldred's kitchen table, writing something with a look of absolute concentration. Not us, she thought. That is not going to be us. She had no idea that by morning, everything she'd already survived was about to look like the easy part. It started with a letter. Mrs. Aldred found it on the front step when she went out at first light. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper with one line written in a hand that had been deliberate enough to disguise itself. Your charity case has a husband. He's been asking after her. Mrs. Aldred stood on her porch for a long moment. Then she folded the paper, put it in her apron pocket, and went back inside. She didn't tell Nora, not yet. She needed to think first. Nora was already in the kitchen. Coffee on, children coming downstairs, Jessie dressed and looking at the door like he was ready to walk to school that very minute if someone would just give the word. Boone said he'd meet us at 8, Nora said. Mrs. Aldred nodded and sat down and kept her face entirely neutral, which was the hardest thing she'd done in years. Boone arrived at 7:55. He came to the back door. Nora let him in. He looked at her face, then at Mrs. Aldred's face, and something in his expression sharpened the way it sharpened when he was reading a room and not liking what he found. What happened? He said. Mrs. Aldred reached into her apron pocket and set the paper on the table. Nora looked at it. She did not pick it up. She read it where it lay. The kitchen went very quiet. Go upstairs, Nora said to the children. Quiet. Absolute. Jessie didn't argue. He moved the little ones out with the practiced efficiency of a child who had been the second adult in the household for months, and the sound of small feet on the stairs filled the silence and then faded. Nora picked up the paper, read it again, set it back down. Warren, she said, just the name, like a stone she'd found in her boot. Your husband, Boone said. My ex-husband, she said. Her voice was flat and hard. In the eyes of God, maybe. In the eyes of the law, still. I never... She stopped, breathed. I never had money for a lawyer. I just ran. Is he dangerous? Mrs. Aldred asked. Straight out, no softening. Nora looked at the table. He never hit me, she said. He drank. He lied. He was gone for weeks at a stretch and came back like nothing had happened. And then last October he just... She pressed her lips together. He left, took the horse, took the money I'd been keeping in the flour tin for 9 months, left us with 4 days of food and the rent coming due. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had been past crying about Nora Vane for a long time. Dangerous, she said. Define the word. He's not violent. He's worse than violent. He's convincing. He can walk into a room and have people believing him inside of 5 minutes. If he knows I've got a roof over my head in a situation... She stopped. He'll come here. He'll find a way to take whatever there is to take. He always does. Boone picked up the letter, looked at it. Someone in this town sent word, he said, or wrote to someone who did. Delia, Mrs. Aldred said, we don't know that. We don't not know it, the old woman said flatly. Boone set the letter down. He looked at Nora with those steady gray eyes. Here's what we do. We still take the children to Reverend Hatch this morning. We don't change our plans because someone wants us scared. Then I'm going to find out who sent that letter." "And if Warren actually comes?" Nora asked. "Then we deal with Warren. He could have a legal claim. He's still my husband in the law's eyes." "He abandoned you and 3 children," Boone said. "Wyoming territorial law on desertion is clear, and I know the circuit judge personally." His voice had not risen at all, but there was something in it now that had gone hard without getting loud. "You let me worry about the legal part." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You keep taking on my problems," she said. "Somebody has to." "Boone." Her voice had an edge. "You barely know me." "Boone," he said her name like a period. "Let me help you, just let me." She looked at him. She looked at Mrs. Aldred. She looked at the letter on the table. Then she turned toward the stairs. "Children," she called, "get your shoes. We're going." This story is reaching the part where it gets harder before it gets better. If you want to see where Nora lands, subscribe. Hit the bell. I'll be here. Reverend Hatch was a lean, careful man with ink-stained fingers, and the manner of someone who had spent his career navigating between people who wanted opposite things and had developed a professional wariness as a result. He looked up when Boone walked in with Nora and her 3 children, and he sat forward in his chair. "Boone," he said carefully. "Morning, Thomas." Boone put his hand briefly on Jesse's shoulder. Just a moment, just enough. "These children need enrolling. Jesse is 7, Maggie is 5. Cal's too young yet." The Reverend looked at Nora. She looked back at him without flinching and without smiling. "Name," he said. "Nora," she said, and then, after the smallest pause, "Vane." It cost her something to say it. Boone could hear it. Hatch wrote it down. He wrote all the children's names without asking about a husband, without asking where she'd come from, without asking why she had no shoes yesterday, which Boone had mentioned to him quietly the day before, because Boone was the kind of man who laid groundwork before he needed it. "School meets Monday through Saturday mornings," Hatch said. "Children bring their own lunch." "They will," Nora said. Hatch looked at Jesse. Jesse looked back at him with those dark, patient eyes. Maggie gave the Reverend a small, composed nod. Hatch's expression shifted, just briefly, before it went back to professional. They were back outside in 15 minutes. The summer air hit them hard. "That wasn't so bad," Maggie said. "No," Nora said. "It wasn't." She looked at Boone. He was watching the street with the cataloging attention of a man who had made a long study of which things were what they appeared to be and which were not. "Thank you," she said. "I've got rounds," he said. She almost smiled. "Go." He was walking away when she called after him. He turned. "Be careful of Delia Forsyth," she said. "She doesn't look like the kind of woman who loses gracefully." "No, ma'am," he said. "She is not." He left. Nora stood in the morning heat with her 3 children around her and let herself, for one single careful moment, feel something that was close enough to hope to be frightening. She should have known better. The man rode into Calderwood at noon. He came from the south on a chestnut horse that had been ridden hard and wasn't pleased about it. He was tall, loose in the way of men who have never felt the weight of consequence settle on them properly. His face had the particular lived-in handsomeness of a man who had spent years relying on it. His name was Warren Vane. He asked at the saloon first, because the saloon was always where Warren started. He sat down, ordered whiskey, and smiled at the barman and said, with the practiced ease of a man who had made a lifelong study of sounding reasonable, "I'm looking for my wife. Woman named Nora, 3 children. She came through here recently. You seen her?" The barman, a man named Pete, who had tended bar for 15 years and had seen every variety of person, said he didn't know. Warren smiled like he believed him and tipped well and left. He asked at the general store. He asked at the post office. He was charming at both places. The picture of a worried husband, and at the general store, a young woman who had not yet learned to distrust a certain kind of easy smile, told him she'd seen a woman with 3 children going into the Aldred boarding house on Pine Road. Warren thanked her warmly and pointed his horse toward Pine Road. Mrs. Aldred heard the knock and got to the door before Nora could reach it, because the old woman had been moving quickly all morning, and being first to the door was a form of control she was not prepared to surrender. She opened it and looked at Warren Vane and knew immediately, the way women know things, exactly what she was looking at. "Good afternoon," Warren said. Wide, warm, practiced. "I'm looking for my wife, Nora. I believe she might be staying here." "Is she expecting you?" Mrs. Aldred said. Something flickered behind his eyes. "It's a bit of a surprise. I've been searching for her for months. I've been very worried." Mrs. Aldred looked at him for a long moment. She had been lied to by experts in her 63 years. She knew what it felt like. "Wait here," she said. She closed the door. Nora was at the end of the hallway. She had heard his voice through the door, and she had not moved. She stood absolutely still with Cal on her hip, and Maggie pressed against her leg, and her face had gone to something Mrs. Aldred had not seen on it before. Not fear precisely. The very close cousin of fear. The kind that knows the thing it's afraid of from the inside. "He's here," Mrs. Aldred said quietly. "I heard," Nora said. "You don't have to open that door." "Yes, I do." "Nora, take the little ones upstairs. Please." She set Cal down and pressed him gently toward Mrs. Aldred. "I don't want them to hear." Mrs. Aldred took both small children by the hand and went upstairs without another word, because she understood in the way of women who have been through things that sometimes the best help you can give is to clear the field and let a woman fight. Nora smoothed her dress with both hands, breathed in once through her nose. She opened the door. Warren looked at her with that smile that had once meant something to her in a different life. "Nora," he said, warm, like coming home. "Warren," she said, like a door closing. He looked her over. She watched him take inventory. She could see the recalibration happening behind his eyes as he compared the woman in front of him to the one he'd left. And she felt with cold clarity that he did not like what the comparison was telling him. "You look well," he said. "What do you want, Warren?" He glanced past her into the house. She shifted to fill the doorway. His eyes came back to her face. The warmth had dropped away now, replaced by something quieter and more honest, which in Warren's case was not an improvement. "I heard you've got a situation here," he said. "Good house. Someone taking care of you. That marshal seems friendly." He spread his hands. "I just thought maybe we could come to an arrangement." "What arrangement?" "I'll stay clear," he said. "Won't make any claims on you or the children. Won't make trouble. All I need is a little help getting started again. $50 would do it. Enough for supplies and a fresh start, and I'll be out of your way by morning." Nora stared at him. She thought about the 40 miles she'd walked. She thought about Maggie sick for 2 weeks, and Jessie going quiet in the particular way children go quiet when they're trying not to add to what their mother is already carrying. She thought about Cal on her back and the rent she hadn't been able to pay, and the morning she'd stood in an empty kitchen, looking at the flour tin that used to have 9 months of savings in it. She thought about $50 she did not have. "I don't have $50, she said. "Then ask that rancher friend of yours," Warren said pleasantly. "He seems like a man of means." "Get off this porch." "Now, Nora, get off this porch, Warren." Her voice had gone very quiet and very final. "Or I will walk to the marshal's office and tell whoever is there everything, including that you abandoned your children in October with 4 days of food and no money in the middle of winter. And we will find out together what Wyoming territorial law says about that." Warren looked at her. Really looked, perhaps for the first time. He was searching for the woman he'd left, the one who swallowed things down because fighting back cost more than she had. He didn't find her. What he found instead gave him pause. "I'll be in town a few days," he said. "Think on it." "Don't be in town a few days," she said. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it, and her hand flat on the wood, and her eyes shut, and she breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. Upstairs, she could hear Cal talking to himself in his invented language. She could hear Maggie asking Mrs. Aldred something about the cat. She breathed again. Then she went to get her boots, because she was going to Boone Callister's property right now, and she was going there on her own 2 feet. She didn't have to go far. Boone was coming up Pine Road at a pace that was not quite a run, but was the fast cousin of one, and she met him at the front gate. "I know," he said before she could speak. You know? Pete at the saloon came and found me the minute a man started asking questions about a woman and 3 children. He looked at her face. You talked to him. He wants $50 to go away. Boone's jaw went tight. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't do whatever you're about to do. I'm going to have a conversation with him about Wyoming law, Boone said evenly. Nothing more. Warren is slippery, she said. He'll find a way to... Nora. He said her name firmly, not unkindly. Let me help, that's all. Let me. She looked at him. This man who had found her hiding in his barn with 3 children and brought cornbread back in 10 minutes and crouched down to her son's eye level without being asked. She had learned the hard way not to trust quickly. She had also learned, in the past several days, that some people showed you who they were not in the big moments, but in the small ones, in the back door instead of the front. I'm sorry, when he couldn't fix it, in the hand on Jesse's shoulder, brief and steady, and Jesse not pulling away. All right, she said. I trust you. Something shifted in his face. Just enough. Go back inside, he said. I'll find him. Boone. He looked back. He's not violent. He's worse than violent. He's convincing. I'll keep that in mind. Be careful with him. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked down the road. Nora went back inside. Mrs. Aldred was at the bottom of the stairs with Cal in her arms and an expression on her face that Nora had seen before, on her own grandmother, a long time ago. The look of a woman who has seen a great deal and is quietly forming a very specific opinion about what she just witnessed. Don't, Nora said. I didn't say anything. You were about to. Mrs. Aldred smiled, very slightly, very privately. She handed Cal back to his mother. I was going to say, she said, that whatever Boone Callister is about to do, Warren Vane is not ready for it. Nora took her son, held him close. Outside, she could hear boot heels on the dry road, steady and unhurried. She stood and listened until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then Jesse came down the stairs. He looked at his mother's face the way he always looked at it when something was wrong, reading it the way you read weather. Is it bad? He said. Not yet. But it might get bad. Might, she said. He nodded, sat down at the table, opened the primer he'd borrowed from Reverend Hatch and started reading, with his jaw set in the way she recognized, the way he faced things that scared him. Directly, without blinking, because his mother had taught him, without meaning to. That was how you faced them. She watched him for a moment. This 7-year-old man who was her son. They are not getting my children, she thought. Not Warren. Not Delia Forsyth. Not this town. None of them. She had walked 40 miles to get here. She would walk 40 more, if it came to that. But she was beginning to think, just beginning, that she might not have to walk alone anymore. Boone found Warren Vane at the saloon. Of course he did. That was always where men like Warren ended up, in the places that asked no questions and required nothing of you but money. Warren was on his second whiskey and his best smile when Boone sat down across from him without being invited, set his hat on the table, and looked at him with those gray eyes that had a way of making people feel they'd already been weighed. Mr. Vane, Boone said. Warren looked him over with the quick professional assessment of a man who has made a study of how much trouble other men are likely to be. He saw the size of him. He saw the steadiness. He adjusted. Can I buy you a drink? Warren said. No, Boone said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen to me, and then you're going to make a decision that determines how the rest of your time in this territory goes. Warren's smile held. His eyes behind it went careful. Wyoming territorial law, Boone said, his voice quiet and even. A man who abandons his wife and children without financial provision for 60 days or more forfeits his legal claim to marital property, parental custody, and conjugal rights. It's been 8 months, Mr. Vane. 8 months since you left 3 children with 4 days of food and took the household savings. Warren said nothing. The smile was gone. Judge Aldous Ferris rides circuit through this county every 3rd Thursday, Boone continued. 3rd Thursday is in 11 days. He paused. You could stay. You could make your case. Maybe it goes your way. Men have gotten lucky in worse situations. He paused again, longer this time. Or you could ride out of Calderwood tonight, and I won't file the abandonment paperwork. In a few months, Nora can get a proper legal dissolution, and you never have to appear in court. You'd do that, Warren said slowly. For a woman you've known less than a week. For 3 children I've known less than a week, Boone said, and one woman who has earned considerably better than what she's been given. A silence settled between them. Warren turned his glass in his hand, not drinking, just turning it, which Boone recognized as a man running calculations. She never fought like that before, Warren said, almost to himself, looking at the table. She had a reason not to before, Boone said. She was still trying to hold something together. Now she's not. Warren looked down at his drink, set it down without finishing it, pushed back from the table. He stood, looked at Boone one more time with the expression of a man who has played a hand and watched it lose and is deciding whether to argue with the outcome. He decided not to. He picked up his hat, put a coin on the bar, walked out of the saloon without another word. Boone sat there in the empty afternoon light coming through the dirty window. He thought about what he'd just done, what he'd set in motion. He thought about a woman who had said, "I trust you," like it cost her something she couldn't afford to replace. He picked up his hat. He walked out into the evening. He had no idea that by morning, everything between him and Nora was going to be more complicated than helping her, and that the choice he was walking toward was one he hadn't yet recognized as a choice. Warren Vane rode out of Calderwood before sunrise. Pete at the saloon saw him go. The night man at the livery saw him settle his bill and take his horse without a word. By the time the first light came pale over the Clearwater peaks, the only proof Warren had ever been there was a ring on the bar and 15 cents he'd talked Pete into forgetting. Boone found out at 6 in the morning. He stood at the edge of town where the southern road disappeared into the scrub flats and watched the empty distance for a moment. Then he turned around and went to tell Nora. She was in the kitchen. She looked up when he came through the back door and read his face the way she had learned to read it, fast and complete, and she set down her spoon. "He's gone," she said, "left before dawn." She nodded, turned back to the stove. Her shoulders did something, a slight drop, a release of tension that had been living in them so long it had started to feel like posture, like a part of who she was. "Nora," he said, "I'm fine." "I didn't ask." "You were about to." He sat down at the table and watched her cook and said nothing, which was something she'd noticed about him. He knew when silence was the right language. After a while, she said quietly, "Thank you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She turned around. Her eyes were dry and direct. "He's been hanging over us since October. Knowing he's gone is—" She looked toward the ceiling, toward the room where the children were still sleeping. "It's like putting down something heavy, something you didn't even realize was still in your hands." He looked at her across the kitchen in the early light. "There's still the matter of the legal dissolution," he said, because that was the practical thing, and Nora was a woman who respected practical things. "I'll write to Judge Ferris. It'll take a few months, but it'll be clean." "Clean," she repeated, like she was tasting the word. "Yes, I'd like that very much." She poured him coffee, set it in front of him. Their hands were close on the cup, and neither of them moved away quite fast enough, and there was a moment, brief and electric, and immediately retreated from by both of them, that stayed in the kitchen after it had passed, like a match struck and blown out with the smoke still in the air. Mrs. Aldred came downstairs and looked at the two of them and said nothing at all, which was the loudest thing she'd said in days. Delia Forsythe heard about Warren Vane's departure by 8 in the morning, which was impressive given that most of the town had been asleep when he left. She received the news with the tight, controlled expression of a woman who has played a card and watched it lose and is already considering the next hand. She sent a note to Winifred Cross. She sent a separate note to Mayor Price. Then she sat in her parlor with her third cup of tea and she thought. The problem, as Delia saw it, was not Nora specifically. People like Nora came and went. The problem was Boone Callister. It had always been Boone Callister. Boone was the kind of man who, once he decided something mattered, made it a cause. And a man with a cause in a small town was very difficult to move, unless the man himself could be moved. She picked up her pen. The letter arrived at Boone's property the next morning, delivered by a boy from the post office, who handed it over with the expression of someone carrying something he didn't understand, but suspected was trouble. Boone opened it, read it, set it on his work table, and sat with his hands flat on the wood. The letter was from the county sheriff, a man named Garrett Webb. Webb was Delia Forsyth's cousin by marriage. This was a fact Boone had known for years and never previously considered relevant. The letter stated that a formal complaint had been filed with the county office regarding Boone's alleged misuse of his position to coerce a private citizen into leaving the county before a legal matter could be properly adjudicated. The private citizen was Nora Vane. The letter had been drafted and dispatched the day before Warren even left town, which meant it had been written while Boone was still in the saloon talking to Warren, which meant someone had known what Boone was doing before he'd finished doing it. He put on his hat and went to find Mrs. Aldred. "Who else was in that saloon?" he said. Mrs. Aldred, who had not been in the saloon, looked at him steadily over her kitchen table. Nora was beside her. Boone had told them both at the same time because it had stopped making sense to keep anything separate. Nora's face had gone very still. "Delia Forsyth's nephew works there," Mrs. Aldred said. "He tends bar on Tuesday afternoons when Pete has his back trouble." Boone thought back. Tuesday. Pete's back. A younger man behind the bar whom he'd barely registered. "He reported back to Delia," Boone said. "Delia wrote to Webb." "Before you'd even finished talking to Warren," Nora said, quiet, working through it. "Which means it didn't matter what you said to him. They were moving against you the moment you sat down." "Yes." She looked at him. "Boone, this is a complaint against your conduct. This isn't about me anymore. This is about your livelihood." "I know. You could lose." "Nora." He said her name firmly. "I handled it correctly. Webb is Delia's cousin, but the county commissioner is not. The commissioner's office reviews all misconduct complaints. Webb can make noise. He can't actually do anything without grounds." He paused. Probably, she repeated flatly. "There's a hearing," he said. 3 weeks from now at the county seat. I have to appear." The kitchen was quiet. Then Nora stood up. She walked to the window. When she turned around, something in her face had changed, resolved. "This has to stop," she said. "Nora." She sent for Warren, or helped someone send for him. She filed a complaint against the only person in this town who has been decent to us. She is using you to get at me, or using me to get at you, and either way. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness had heat behind it. "I'm not waiting for the next thing she does." "What are you suggesting?" Mrs. Aldred asked. "I'm going to talk to her myself," Nora said. Boone and Mrs. Aldred both started to object. "No," Nora said, over both of them. "You've been fighting my battles. You're wonderful at it. But it's costing you, and it'll keep costing you, because Delia isn't fighting me. She's fighting you through me. If I go to her directly, she has nothing left to use." "She will eat you alive," Mrs. Aldred said. "She'll try," Nora said. "She hasn't met me properly yet." What Nora is about to do takes more courage than 40 miles of walking ever did. Stay with her, subscribe, hit that bell, drop a comment. Let me know you're here. She went that afternoon. She went alone because going with Boone would prove Delia's point, and going with Mrs. Aldred would look like she needed reinforcement, which she did, but wasn't prepared to show. She told Jesse where she was going, because Jesse deserved to know things, and she walked to the far end of Calderwood, where Delia Forsyth's house sat back from the street, well-maintained and self-assured, exactly like its owner. She knocked. The housekeeper answered and looked at her with the expression of someone who had been briefed. "I'd like to see Mrs. Forsyth," Nora said. "I'll wait on the porch until she's available." It took 4 minutes, long enough to be a statement, short enough to admit curiosity. Delia came to the door in a dress that suggested she'd changed when she heard who it was, which told Nora something useful. "Mrs. Vane," Delia said. "It's Nora," she said. "Just Nora for now. May I come in?" Delia considered it. Then she opened the door. They sat in the parlor. The same parlor where Delia had organized her campaign with teacups and careful phrasing, though Nora didn't know that specifically. The room told her what she needed to know anyway. The precision of it. The portrait above the fireplace, positioned to be the first thing you saw. You went to the county sheriff, Nora said, no preamble. Delia looked at her without flinching. I expressed a concern about the conduct of... You filed a formal complaint against Boone Callister for doing his job, Nora said. You filed it while he was still in the saloon, which means it was written before you knew what he said, which means you were going to file it regardless. She paused. I want to know why. The man overstepped. The man protected a woman and 3 children from someone who abandoned them in the middle of winter. That's not overstepping. That's what a decent person does. Delia's chin came up. This is a respectable town. We have standards. For whom? Nora said. Silence. Tell me the standard, Nora said. Tell me where it's written that a woman with 3 children who walked 40 miles in August doesn't meet it. Tell me where the respectability ends and the cruelty begins, because I'm having real difficulty finding that line. Delia's jaw was tight, but she hadn't looked away. Nora noticed that. A woman who breaks eye contact has given ground. Delia was not giving ground. You've disrupted this town, Delia said finally. I didn't disrupt anything. I came into a town and asked for work and a safe place for my children. Boone Callister made his own choices. Vera Aldred made hers. The people on your side made theirs. I was just trying to feed my family. Boone is... Delia stopped. Boone is what? Nora said. Something moved across Delia's face, something old and private. Boone Callister has been the steadying thing in this town for 11 years, Delia said, and her voice had dropped, lost its public edge, and become something more unguarded. He has been good at it because he has stayed separate, because he has kept himself apart from personal entanglement. The moment a man like that starts fighting for someone specifically... She stopped again. Nora looked at her. You're not worried about the town, Nora said slowly. You're worried about him. Delia's eyes were sharp. Don't be absurd. But Nora had heard it, the thing underneath the righteousness. This woman had watched Boone Callister from a distance for 11 years and had decided, in the way people decide things they cannot admit to themselves, that he belonged to a category that didn't include getting attached to nameless women with 3 children. She was protecting her idea of him, viciously, wrongly, but with a kind of logic that was almost comprehensible. Mrs. Forsyth, Nora said carefully, I am not here to take anything from this town. I'm not here to change who Boone Callister is. I'm here because my children were hungry and I needed somewhere to start. She held the woman's gaze. If you withdraw the complaint against him, I give you my word that I will stand on my own 2 feet from here forward. I will not ask him to fight my battles. I will build what I build with my own hands. No more conflict, no more sides. She paused. But if you continue this, if you keep using that position against him on my behalf, you will do exactly what you're afraid I'll do. You will be the one who costs him. The parlor clock ticked. Delia Forsyth sat very still. You are not what I expected, she said finally. People rarely are, Nora said. She was halfway back to Mrs. Aldred's when Boone fell into step beside her. She hadn't heard him coming, which meant he'd been watching for her, which meant he'd followed her. How long were you out there? She said. Long enough, he said. You heard. Parts of it. He was quiet for half a block. You told her you'd stop asking me for help. Yes. I don't recall you asking for very much to begin with. I know. She kept walking. I needed her to hear it, and it's true enough to say. Another silence. Easier this time. Nora. He said her name. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything you'd object to. You were going to say you don't need protecting, and you can handle the complaint yourself. That's mostly accurate, he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too. She turned to face him on the empty stretch of road, with the afternoon pressing down on both of them. I have let other people carry my weight my entire adult life, she said. I married Warren Vane, partly because I did not believe I could do things alone. I spent years letting him make decisions, because fighting for the right to make my own felt like more than I had. She looked at him directly. I am done with that. I am going to stand on my own feet in this town, and I am going to do it clearly." She stopped. Then, softer. "Including when that means not hiding behind someone who deserves better than a misconduct complaint on his record because of me." Boone looked at her for a long moment. "You finished?" he said. "Yes." "Good." He started walking again. "Because I went to see Delia myself this morning, before you did." She blinked. "You what?" "I told her the complaint was retaliatory, that I had documentation of her contact with Warren before his arrival, that if she wanted to discuss conduct, we could begin with sending anonymous letters designed to bring a man with a legal claim back to a woman who had fled him." Nora stared at him. "You let me walk in there, knowing she'd already decided to—" "I didn't know what you were going to say," he said calmly, "and I wanted to see what you'd do." She stopped walking again. "That is the most infuriating thing anyone has said to me in recent memory." "Probably." He stopped too, turned, and his face had something in it that was new, open in a way he didn't usually allow. "It was also one of the bravest things I have ever seen, going to her alone, saying what you said." The words landed differently than she'd expected, not like praise, like something truer. "I had a reason to be brave," she said quietly. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then Maggie's voice came screaming up Pine Road from the direction of the boarding house, not a scared scream, a gleeful one, the kind 3-year-olds produce when they have discovered something excellent, and the moment broke apart into something smaller and ordinary and livable. They both started walking, faster this time. The complaint was withdrawn by sundown. Delia Forsyth submitted the withdrawal in writing to the county office with no explanation given, and that was the end of it officially. Unofficially, Calderwood spent several days dissecting every possible reason, and the consensus settled on something vague about a misunderstanding, which was what small towns settled on when the truth was too complicated to summarize neatly. Winifred Cross came to the boarding house 3 days later. She came alone, without Delia, and she brought a jar of preserved plums and held it in front of her like a peace offering, or possibly a shield. Nora answered the door. The two women looked at each other. "I want to apologize," Winifred said. She said it plainly, without decoration. "I knew what Delia was doing, and I didn't stop it. That was wrong." She held out the jar. "This doesn't fix it," she said. "No," Nora agreed. "It doesn't." Winifred nodded. "May I come in anyway?" Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped back. Mrs. Aldred accepted the plums with appropriate gravity, cut the biscuits she just made, and put the kettle on. And Winifred Cross sat at the kitchen table across from Nora Vane, and they talked for an hour, not about what had happened, but about other things. The kind of things women talk about when they are trying to determine whether they can trust each other. It was not forgiveness. It was something more practical than forgiveness, which was the beginning of a livable arrangement. When Winifred left, Jesse came downstairs and looked at the jar of plums on the counter. "Is she an enemy or not?" he asked. "She's trying not to be," Nora said. Jesse thought about that. "Does trying count?" "Usually," Nora said, "if they keep trying." He nodded, satisfied with the logic. "Can I have a biscuit?" After supper, he went back upstairs. Boone came that evening. He came the way he always came now, back door, hat off at the threshold. And Mrs. Aldred was elsewhere, which Nora was fairly certain was not accidental. He sat across from her. She poured him coffee. They sat in the easy quiet that had grown between them over the past weeks, like something that had taken root without being planted. "The paperwork goes to Judge Ferris tomorrow," he said. "Good," she said. 6 months, maybe less, and it's done. Legal." "Clean," she said, like they'd agreed. He turned his cup in his hands. There was something he was working up to. She could see it the way you see weather coming in the small signs before the obvious ones. "Nora," he said. "Boone," she said. He looked up. She was almost smiling. "I'm trying to say something," he said. "I can see that," she said. "Say it." He was quiet for a moment. Cole Hatcher was a man. She stopped herself. Boone Callister was a man who did not speak until he was sure of what he meant, and what he was about to say, she could see, he was only halfway sure of. which was probably the most uncertain she had ever seen him. "You said you were going to stand on your own 2 feet," he said. "I believe that. I've watched you do it." A pause. "But standing on your own 2 feet doesn't have to mean standing alone." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you anything," he said quickly enough that she knew he'd rehearsed it. This isn't—" He stopped, started again. "I just want you to know that whatever you build here, whatever you decide, whatever comes next—" He met her eyes. "I'd like to still be at the back door, if that's acceptable." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the children laughed. Jessie, by the sound of it, and the ordinary sound of it, filled the silence and made it livable. "It's acceptable," Nora said. He nodded like someone receiving useful information, like a man who was going to go away and think carefully about what to do with it. He stood, put on his hat. "Good night, Nora," he said. "Good night, Boone." He went out the back door. She sat at the table for a long time after he left, hands around her cup, thinking. Mrs. Aldred appeared in the doorway. She had not, it turned out, been very far away. "He wants to keep coming to the back door," Nora said. Mrs. Aldred was quiet for a moment. "That man," she said, "has been working this county for 11 years. He has come to my back door for errands and questions and borrowed tools, and never once offered to keep doing it." She picked up the plum jar and carried it to the shelf. "Just something to think about," she said mildly, and began to tidy up. Nora thought about it, through the dishes, through the children's bedtime, through the long, quiet hour after the house went still. She thought about a man who had stopped walking because he'd seen her in the corner of his barn, who had come back in 10 minutes with cornbread and cheese, who had said "I'm sorry" when he couldn't fix something, who had put his hand on Jessie's shoulder and not pulled away. She thought about the word alone, and what it had meant for 8 months, and what it was beginning to mean now. She pressed her hand flat against the cool plaster wall, the same gesture she'd made that first night. Something had changed. She wasn't sure yet what to call it, but she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had survived enough to trust her own instincts, that it was not the kind of thing she should walk away from. The letter from Judge Ferris came 7 weeks later. Mrs. Aldred set it in front of Nora on the kitchen table without a word. Nora looked at the official seal, breathed once, opened it. The judge had reviewed the documentation, given the evidence of desertion, 8 months, 3 children, 0 financial provision, and given that Warren Vane had not contested anything and could not be located to contest anything, the dissolution was granted, effective immediately. Nora read it through twice, set it down, picked it up and read it again, because she needed to see it 3 times before it became real. She was Nora Vane again, her own name, her grandmother's name, the name that had been waiting on the other side of all of it. Mrs. Aldred was watching her. "Well," the old woman said. "It's done," Nora said. Mrs. Aldred sat down across from her and folded her hands and looked at Nora with those clear, settled eyes. "How do you feel?" Nora thought about it, honestly. "Like I put something down," she said. "Like I've been carrying a stone for so long, I forgot what it felt like not to. And now—" She stopped. "Light," she said. "I feel light." Mrs. Aldred smiled. A real one, unhurried, the kind that took over her whole face when she let it. "Good," she said. "That's exactly right." She told Boone that evening. He had a usual time now, 6:30, after his last rounds of the property, and she had stopped pretending this was a coincidence and started quietly arranging dinner around it. She opened the back door before he knocked because she'd heard his boots on the walk and had stopped pretending she didn't listen for them. She held up the letter. He read it. His jaw moved slightly. He looked up. "Nora Vane," he said. "Nora Vane," she said. Something moved through his face, through and gone before she could name it, but she felt the aftershock of it. "Sounds right," he said. "It does," she agreed. They stood in the doorway with the evening coming in warm around them, and then Jessie appeared behind Nora and looked at Boone with the gravity of a boy who had appointed himself his family's official evaluator. "Are you staying for supper?" Jessie said. "If I'm invited," Boone said. Jessie looked at his mother. She looked at Jessie. A full conversation passed in that look. Everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, everything they were deciding about what came next. Jesse turned back to Boone. "You're invited," he said. "Wash your hands first. Mama's particular about that." Boone looked at Nora. She stepped back from the door and let him in. The weeks that followed had a rhythm that Nora had not felt since before Warren, since before the long unraveling of everything she'd built her life around. The children found their footing in Calderwood, with the natural adaptability of children who have survived hard things and learned to find solid ground wherever it appears. Jesse read through every book Reverend Hatch had in the church, and the Reverend quietly ordered more. Maggie developed a fierce and loyal friendship with a red-haired girl named Bet, whose mother showed up tentatively one Sunday with a cobbler and stayed for 2 hours. Cal learned to say Boone before he learned most other words, which Nora suspected was not entirely accidental. Mrs. Aldred's house became, without anyone formally deciding it, a home. Not borrowed, real. The kind where the people inside it know where everything is and what the walls mean. Nora took in laundry, then mending. Then Reverend Hatch asked her to copy out school documents in her clear hand and mentioned he'd pay, and she said yes without hesitating. Mrs. Aldred tried to refuse rent, and Nora put $12 on the kitchen table and said it was not a discussion, and Mrs. Aldred looked at the money for a long moment and said fine, and they never mentioned it again. She was building it, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, day by day, her own. Boone came to supper 3 times a week, then 4, and the children absorbed him into the household with the practical efficiency of children who have decided someone is trustworthy and see no reason to be subtle about it. He fixed the back fence on a Saturday without being asked. He brought Jesse a book about the history of the territory that Jesse read in 2 days and then argued with him about for a week, which Boone seemed to find genuinely satisfying. He taught Maggie how to whistle, which Nora pretended to object to and secretly found delightful. Nora watched all of this from a careful, clear-eyed distance, because she had promised herself she would know before she decided, and she was not yet entirely sure. And then one evening, in late October, when the summer had finally released its grip and the air had come back to something bearable, everything shifted. It was Delia Forsyth who came to the door. Nora opened it, and they looked at each other across the threshold with the particular wariness of 2 women who had been honest with each other once and weren't entirely sure what to do with that. "May I come in?" Delia said. Nora let her in. They sat in the parlor, and something about the arrangement of them in that room, the October light, the distance between where they'd started and where they'd ended up, made the air feel significant. "I'm going to say something," Delia said. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before you respond." "All right," Nora said. Delia folded her hands. "I was wrong about you," she said. "Not partially wrong. Wrong." She said it with the difficulty of someone accustomed to being right, who has decided that accuracy matters more than comfort. "I made a judgment about what kind of person you were based on your circumstances, which were none of your making. I used this town's systems against you and against Boone, which was—" She stopped. "Shameful," she said. "That's the only word for it." The room was quiet. "You could have made things worse for me in return," Delia continued. "When you came to my house, you had things you could have used. You didn't." She paused. "That told me something about your character that I was not expecting." Nora was quiet for a moment. "What do you want, Mrs. Forsyth?" "I want to know," Delia said carefully, "whether it's too late to be useful to you." "Useful how?" "There are women in this town who follow my lead because they always have," Delia said. "Some of them have children in that school alongside yours. Some of them," she paused, "some of them need to see that I've changed my position, because that's the only thing that will change theirs." It was the most unguarded thing anyone had said to Nora in a long time, and it came from the last person she would have expected. "You want to publicly correct yourself," Nora said. "This isn't about you needing my approval," Delia said. "You don't need it. You've made that clear. It's about the fact that I did damage, and I have the tools to repair it, and I would like to use them correctly this time." Nora thought about what Jesse had said. Does trying count? Usually does, if they keep trying. "Yes," Nora said. "It's not too late." Cole came that evening. She stopped. Boone came that evening, the way he always came. and Nora opened the door before he knocked. "How was it?" he said. "Better than expected," she said. She apologized. He raised his eyebrows. "To you directly?" "Yes, and she wants to correct herself publicly." Nora looked at him. "You knew she was going to come." "I may have had a conversation with her last week," he said without apology. She shook her head slowly. "You are the most quietly strategic person I have ever met." "I just know this town," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too. They were on the road in the October evening, the air finally cool, the leaves on the cottonwoods going gold and releasing in the slight wind. Everything felt like it was sitting at the edge of something. "Boone," she said. "Yeah." "Ask me again." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look a careful man gives when he is checking that he understood correctly, whether it is real, whether he is allowed to believe it. "Nora Vane," he said quietly, "will you let me stay?" "Not at the back door," she said. "At the table." "With the children." "With me." He breathed in. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I meant." "I know," she said. "I needed to be the one to say it." He understood that. She could see that he understood it exactly. That for a woman who had spent years having things decided for her, the choosing mattered as much as the thing chosen. More, maybe. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in stories where everything is gesture and symbol. He just reached out and took her hand carefully, the way you take hold of something you have been waiting to hold, and she let him. And they stood there on the road in the October wind with the leaves falling, and everything very simple and very true. 4 months later, on a cold, clear morning in January, the same month Warren had walked out, which was not a coincidence Nora would ever mention out loud. Boone Callister stood in front of Judge Ferris with Nora Vane beside him, and 3 children in their best clothes arranged behind them. He said the words that made her Nora Callister. Jessie stood straight and serious throughout, which was how Jessie stood through everything that mattered. Maggie cried a little and pretended she had something in her eye. Cal, who understood very little of what was happening, but understood perfectly that it was important, reached his arms up until Boone bent down and lifted him, and he put his head on Boone's shoulder and stayed there like he'd always known that was where it went. Mrs. Aldred sat in the front row in her best dress, with her hands folded in her lap and an expression that was too private to name. Delia Forsythe sat in the 3rd row. She had not been invited. No one asked her to leave. When it was done, when the judge had said the final word, and Boone had looked at Nora with those steady gray eyes, and she had looked back at him with everything she was and everything she'd survived, Jessie tugged on Boone's sleeve. Boone looked down at him. "Yeah?" Boone said. Jessie looked up at him with those dark, ancient 7-year-old eyes. "You can call me Jess," he said. "If you want. That's what my grandfather called me." Boone looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he put his free hand on Jessie's shoulder, the same brief weight he'd offered that first morning in the schoolhouse, and held it there. "Thanks, Jess," he said. The boy nodded once. Satisfied, done. Nora Callister stood on the steps of the Calderwood courthouse in January, with her husband on one side and her 3 children around her, and the cold, clear Wyoming sky above all of them. And she thought about a woman who had walked into a barn with nothing. No last name, no plan, no coin, and feet that had bled through 40 miles of road. She had not known that first afternoon whether they would eat. She had not known whether anyone in this town would look at her without suspicion. She had not known whether the thing inside her that kept saying, keep going would be enough. It had been enough. It was always going to be enough. She understood that now. The keeping going was not a means to an end. The keeping going was the thing itself, the center of her, the part that Warren could not take, and the road could not break, and the heat could not burn out, and Delia Forsythe could not legislate away. She had walked into Calderwood with nothing. She was walking out of that courthouse with a name that was truly hers, a home, a husband who came through the back door and understood why that mattered, 3 children who were fed and in school and whole, and the knowledge, clean and permanent and entirely her own, that she had built every single piece of it herself. Boone looked at her. Ready? She took his hand. She turned her face toward the street, toward the town, toward whatever came next. Yes, Nora Callister said. And she was. If Nora's story reached you today, if you felt even one moment of it in your chest, this channel is where stories like this live. Subscribe to Redwood Chronicles. Hit the bell so you never miss one. Leave a comment and tell me which part of Nora's journey stayed with you. I read every single word.